Okay, well, thanks GIWA for giving me a spot. I've been given the brief of what's new in pulses. So Sadiq's made it easy, so anything after 2000 is new. No. Take all the credit, all the blame. So I'm going to talk about agronomy. I'm also going to talk about varieties, as you necessarily do. So I have asked various people for slides from the breeders and so on, and I've got lots of returns from them, and I haven't got time to include everything that they sent, but in the online version that you'll get, you'll have all of the slides from the breeders. So what's new? I thought I'd start with a few agronomy things. So here's a new, coming to you next year, if you're a farmer, are some acid-tolerant rhizobia. This is from Ron Yates from DPIRD / Uni, and this is for the field peas, vetch and lentils, and there's also another strain for the Faber bean developed by Ross Ballard from Sardi. And some pretty impressive photos there that Ron sent us, so pretty clear really. This is a pH of 4.8 at Muiresque, so you know, a bit iffy for, certainly pretty iffy for lentils, not too bad for peas and vetches perhaps, and if it rains enough, okay for beans. But you can see the big difference. He's obviously got some background there, because hopefully you can see some nodules on the uninoculated ones. You've got the standard Group EF that you're currently buying, more nodules, and a lot more in that new strain. And you can see the growth, hopefully. Pretty poor there, not too bad. This is all just before flowering, and streets ahead. So obviously going to put more nitrogen into the system. It's not going to happen in every site, but he's also picked up a big difference in the yield. So basically half a tonne even compared to the commercial strain now. So as I said, that may not happen with every species in every situation, but I think you should see better nodulation at that lower pH, and you'll also hopefully get better survival from year to year. So as you go forward with, say, vetches and lentils, which are often sown early under sometimes trying conditions, you're less reliant on the rhizobia that you're applying with this year's seed. You've got hopefully some better background. Now, I've mentioned that, so it will widen where you can grow some of these, but inherently species like lentils, say, don't like pH 4.8, even if you put on 200 units of nitrogen, they're still not going to grow properly. And so there's a lot of work going on in the background, and I know DPIRD are involved with screening genotypes in cahoots with AgVic and New South Wales DPI and a few others to try and find varieties that are better suited to lower soils. Because as many people have said, not in big paddocks, not every hectare in a big, on a big property in a big paddock is suitable to what we're growing in the pulses. There's often a lot of variation. One of the other things that's going to coming along, that's not just for pulses, but it'll also be useful in cereals and canola, is the Internet of Things, that low energy, sending packets of information when it can, without drawing down on batteries, with sensors in your crop. So we've been looking at, in Faber beans for chocolate spot management, humidity, temperature sensors in there. It sends it in real time, and it'll help you with appropriate decision tools, help you decide whether to spray or not. As we get into the lower and medium rainfall areas where people grow beans, they grow vetches, they grow lentils, where botrytis is an issue, if you've got a computer telling you no, the conditions aren't suitable, nothing's going to grow if it's less than 70% relative humidity from the fungus. It has to be about 90 or higher humidity. You haven't got those conditions, you get into canopy closure and there's no outlook for a lot of rain for a lot of time. You're just spending money for the sake of it, just because you're afraid. And it's really hard as a consultant to tell someone not to put a fungicide on. So if you've got something to help you with that, I think it'll be very useful going forward. And just make some of these crops a little bit more lower risk in mindset and also in costs. Tony mentioned the new herbicides that are coming through, and it's certainly something that somebody helps people grow some of these things to give a bit more confidence in growing them. I know coming back into growing, went to the dark side and worked on canola for about 10 years. Coming back into the pulses, certainly I had conversations many times with Marty Harries about this. I don't know about these chickpeas, Marty, we can't afford to have radish blowouts in the chickpeas because no one will want to grow them, because you drive around, there's very little weeds out in the paddocks now. The people have really done an excellent job with weed seed set management with various means, and most of the radish is on the fence lines. And if we start growing some of these broadleaf crops with not very competitive, don't have good options, they're the potential for blowouts. But I'm a lot more confident with even existing stuff that up until a couple of years ago were available, so the turbines, the balancers, those sort of things have really improved things. But then we've got the new stuff. We had Terrain come out a few years ago, Group G, Group 14 chemical come out. And then Reflex, as Tony mentioned, available really broad acre last year. Much longer lasting control. So it's really easy to get chickpea crops. Those are plots at Dalwallinu with Harmahinda and Stacey Power from the Ag Department looking at them. And it's really easy to get nice clean paddocks like that. And you see it when you drive around and look at the few chickpea paddocks around. Invariably they've got low levels of radish compared to back in the 90s when we had a lot more grown. So a lot more confident about things going forward. Obviously, post-emergent options are very limited. We've only really got broad strike saying chickpeas and are not very good on radish. And so that's something that we need to think about, and I'll talk about that coming forward. And certainly this is where some of these slides come through. So this is Christy Hobson, who's in charge of Chickpea Breeding Australia. I think most people know the Pulse Breeding Australia model sort of ended, and now we've got the privatisation sort of model with GRDC New South Wales building up Chickpea Breeding Australia. They're just moving into their new facilities. Glenn Lendon's here from Chickpea Breeding Australia representing them. If you want to talk more about what the great facilities they've got, and so they're amping up their capacity to have plots and so on. And Christy's trying to single-handedly increase the chickpea area in WA by having more plots. So you can see where we started from with the Pulse Breeding Australia model. Not many, and then aiming to get 10,000 plots in WA. And that's roughly about 10 hectares, which it's probably not much if you compare it to the cereals and canola plots that are sown in WA. But 10 hectares probably makes Christie about the 30th or 31st biggest chickpea grower in the state. And the other crop, what I'm mentioning is the lentils have been increasing as well since. So field pea in some way, money's been dipped out of that and put into lentils, and the number of sites and plots are increasing. One thing I should have mentioned, the big increase this year, 2022, is now also an increase in number of sites from 4 to 6. So previously we had us, the Ag Department, doing Esperance trials, Living Farm doing 3 other sites throughout the wheat belt. Then this year Intergrain came to the party and increased the number of sites. So they've got, I think, at Northampton and Merredin added. So the capacity is building up over east, and certainly the early generation stuff is also increasing in terms of stage 1 number of plots. Faba beans there as well, that's pretty stable. That's just a couple of trials that I do down in Esperance. So chickpeas, the news, if you like, is the new variety Captain. This is a shot from the PACE, the Pulse Association of the South East, down in Esperance, which Phil's here. Phil Longmire is on the committee, and I'm a life member of, and it's the surviving pulse grower group in the state, and that's their field day, and we had the Curtin crew from CCDM there as well. This is Michael Magnotti's Salmon Gums low rainfall chickpea Captain bulk up that went about 1.5 tonnes per hectare last year. The main claim to fame for WA, I think, for Captain is that it's a taller variety, tends to flower slightly later than our normal varieties, say Striker, and that means that it starts to flower and set its pods higher up. So in most situations you get a taller canopy, and I think in every situation you end up with pods higher up and make it better for harvesting. It's still got about the same Ascochyta ratings as other mainstream Desi varieties, so no better. It still means our package has to be the same, and I think even if we get better released varieties with better ratings for Ascochyta, I don't think our package should change, because we've got to protect that genetic resistance. So it's all about isolating from last year's stubble, getting clean seed when you buy it in, putting seed dressing, pea pickle tea on, putting on an early spray at 6 to 8 weeks, and depending on where you are, perhaps a canopy closure spray, and then every crop for your seed, a pod wash spray, and in higher situations, more often sprays if required. Well, we can't afford to put 10 sprays on. But I think with appropriate management, we've got big paddocks. It's pretty easy to isolate from last year's stubble in our situation. And if you have clean seed, don't bring it in, knock it back early. You're halfway there, I think. Chilling tolerance is one of the many things that are wrong with chickpeas. It's already been mentioned. When, say, lentils sown early are setting 30 to 50% of their flowers into pods, chickpeas are setting 2 to 4% of their flowers into pods, so they're pretty hopeless. They are getting better, and this is, those are Christie's words, and I only have to agree with her. In the longer term, we've got some hybrids now that I've looked at, and I agree they're just not quite good enough. But in the background, Cyro with Jens Berger, and I think Lars Campus from Cyro/CCDM Curtin is involved as well in developing with the wild species, wild relatives of chickpeas, trying to get some of that cold tolerance into that species. And I think that is work that has to be supported going forward. If we can get pod setting earlier, then we can look at being able to handle, say, boron and salt soils, because they're not trying to mature under very dry conditions later in the year. It also means we can perhaps bring early maturing types in to try and enable crop topping, because that's another weakness for chickpeas. You can't at the end of the year really effectively crop top the weeds, be it ryegrass or radish. The timing just doesn't quite work out. So if we can get cold tolerance, we can really solve a lot of problems, I think, going forward, and certainly make them a lot more viable for south of WA, South Australia and Victoria. So coming soon to a field near you are some herbicide tolerances in the chickpeas. So most pulses now have IMI tolerance. The lentils have been around for a while, or the XT ones, and most of the varieties from Grains Innovation Australia as well. The beans have got it with Bendop. Peas have sort of had it, and they've had some improvements over the last few years. Now we've got some chickpeas coming, and I believe there's some vetch being developed as well with IMI tolerance. So in the main, it means that it will handle the residues of IMIs. So increasingly people are growing IMI canola and particularly IMI cereals. And even last year I had a few farmers send me photos of what's wrong with my chickpeas, Mark, from the north of the state, and invariably it was IMI's residues and the chickpeas getting affected by it. Now, whether we'll get an IMI label to post-emergent options for chickpeas is yet to be sorted out, of course. Certainly in the past, New Farmers certainly helped with the beans and the lentils bringing Intercept label out. Even more, hopefully you can see a pretty stark difference there, is the Lontril tolerance. So Lontral's often used over summer for summer weed control, and most people try and avoid using that if they're going to go pulses. So we're going to get some Lontril tolerance coming through in quite a number of species, so it's pretty stark. But again, for residues, looks like it's going to be a pretty good type. And again, whether we'll see a post-emergent label for Lontril is yet to be seen. We've got issues to think about of not just getting a label up per se, but also the residues in the seed, if there's any issues there. And I should have said that that's work that Christie's worked in with Sardi, developing that. There is now currently a Lontril tolerant lentil available to everyone, GIA Sire. So Grains Innovation Australia is based out of Horsham with Michael Matern and Lan McMurray in South Australia. And we got Lan and Michael sent it over last year, and we included it in our high value pulse project, a little project that we had with GRDC, some demos that we did at Narrabeen with the Corrigan Farm Improvement Group, and also at West Midlands. And we had lots of species with lots of herbicides just to demonstrate what you can and can't use. And the farmers and consultants found them really, really interesting to look at. Pretty stark. We included canola, the yellow flowering plant up there. Obviously you can use Lontril in canola. If you're growing conventional canola, it's your main broadleaf herbicide. Below it is the narrowleaf lupin, durian, and you can see that narrowleaf lupins have some tolerance, so there's scope there for improvement. Albus lupin, a bit more closely related to blue lupin, doesn't like it. There's opportunities there, right guys? chickpeas, faba beans, field peas, didn't like it, all died. Then you got GIA sire, stood out, and the other XTs and conventional lentils killed. So pretty strong tolerance there. It's also got IMI tolerance built in as well, so it should handle all of the residue issues that we might have. Talking about lentils, mostly in Esperance in WA, we certainly get found out on the range of soil. So this is Ridley, this is Kim Jones's place. Every year his lentils in the last 3 or 4 years have looked like this, and he grows 1.8 tonnes per hectare. He started growing them when they were worth $450 a tonne. I think he was selling them for $1,000 a tonne recently. So all of the things that we've talked about, but not everyone has this limestoney soil where they do really well. If you've got boron salts close to the surface, you end up with either car size or football field size areas of bare soil. And if you've got lower pH, even in the Mallee, in our area, you think you've got good pH everywhere, and then you plant lentils and you find out that, oh, there's a MCG size area that's not growing, and you test the soil and just in the top 5 centimetres you've got 4.8, below that you've got 5 or 6, but you've sowed them in that top 5 centimetres and they just don't like it. AgVic PBA carryover is developing and releasing lines all the time, and as I mentioned, GIA are as well. So the XT lines have been coming out for quite some time. In Esperance, we mostly grow Bolt, a PBA Bolt, conventional type, doesn't have IMI tolerance, but it has good tolerance to boron and salt. We'd really like to see an improved version of that, or better. The other one probably worth mentioning is a metribuzin tolerant one. It's just been released, Metro, and a Lightning, which is purported to be, well, shown to be better on sandier soils, albeit alkaline sands. Beans. So University of Adelaide are the main people that breed varieties for this part of the world, and Sam Catt recently took over as the breeder there. And that is a particularly nice crop of beans last year. That's, again, Stacey Power, mid-career RO, standing there at a trial we had at Kendon up last year. Those beans are going 5 tonnes per hectare. That's PBA Amberley, which was released and basically being bulked up by farmers this year. And it's the best one we've got for chocolate spot resistance. It's a slightly later, taller variety. It's got by far the best necking, where they sort of break off or bend over halfway. Tolerance of all of the beans that we look at. So a really good variety coming through. Bendoc was released, I mentioned it, as an IMI-tolerant variety, which is good for that, so handling those residues, but it didn't really have very strong enough chocolate spot resistance. When we got into farmers' paddocks, even farmers have been growing Seymour for quite some time, they switched to Bendoc and suddenly they had to be unmanageable chocolate spot levels in their paddock. And so we really need better version of Bendoc. In a few years, we should have a Seymour level of chocolate spot IMI coming out. And of course, Sam is trying to develop Amberley or better levels of resistance with IMI coming out. He's also probably going to be releasing a metribuzin tolerant variety. He's got quite a few lines in the trials that are much higher yielding with no specific tolerances. He's also looking at vicine, co-vicine, trying to reduce that, particularly as faba beans go into the human consumption market more, to try and reduce those anti-nutritional factors. And also everyone wants a free lunch, so try and improve protein levels as well. Vetches have been mentioned a few times, and it's sort of the sleeper crop in WA. You drive around the state and you come across it all the time. It's a multi-use type of species, very well suited, particularly, say, RM4, the woolly pod vetches, to sowing in February and March when you get those cyclonic rains, and it's a very common thing to do in our area. Very late flowering, but produces bulk throughout the year, multiple grazings, then you can cut hay or graze the dry material or make silage out of it. Not so much a grain crop because it's very late. Then you've got the other extreme, that very late one, to the very early Studenica released last year, which we yet to really... Stuart Nagel, who does the breeding out of South Australia is a very small program, and you're lucky to have 1 or 2 trials in WA. But in the lower rainfall areas, that early maturing variety might be very well suited. I've got it there as a sleeper crop. There is always a possibility that we can get rid of the toxins out of vetches and get it into a wider market. It's a very tough crop, seems to handle the soil types, variations and temperatures a lot better than a lot of other plants. And the other thing I keep coming back to and try to put out there is in some areas in WA, maybe we're not always going to be able to grow a grain crop in legumes, but we can probably always grow biomass. And is there an option really for hay, export of legume hay? And vetches come to mind as already a popular type in the Eastern Australia, be it vetch on their own or vetch and oats. And is that a potential export on its own right into probably not the premium lucerne markets, but other markets where they look for? Yep.
All these new varieties soft-seeded or hard-seeded?
Yeah, so RM4, the woolly pod vetches have got a bad name with Capello with 40% hard seed. RM4 is probably 2 to 4% hard seededness. So you do see it, but it's nothing like the old ones, if you like. And it's been certainly a thing. With Studenica is very low hard seededness. Yeah. So most of the common vetch varieties in the last 10 years have got that low hard seededness. There's actually people growing RM4 phoning up Stuart and going, "You've got a harder seeded one?" Yeah, so it's yin and yang, isn't it? Lupins, everyone's very relaxed about growing lupins, as you can see. So down in my way we've got the lupin guru is Niels Blumen at Gibson. And AGT are the breeders, and Matt sent me some slides and I've pulled out a couple of them, including, come back to herbicides and weed control in the north with blue lupins. It's a big problem. Some very agitated farmers about it. So I know that Matt and I think Lars is helping them do some mutation type breeding and to screen for different herbicides to try and develop that to get some options for blue lupin control. And I believe some private people are also doing that sort of thing too. I've got here the flowering window, but it's really about broadening the genetics in lupins. I know that I go and look at the NVT trials and I go, "Ooh, they all look the same." And I think that's a problem perhaps with chickpeas, with canola and with lupins, is that we've gone down this and narrowed our genetics. So I know that AGT have, over the last few years, been trying to broaden out the genetics that they're looking at for a range of traits, not just, in this instance, flowering. We use this as an example of just trying to get, if we are having March, early April breaks, and if we put in our normal lupins in that time, they get to about this big and they flower, and it doesn't really work. Even in the Geraldton area, where they're fantastic part of the world to grow them. And then if you put them in the south of the state, and if you sowed them really early, you'd have problems again, perhaps with disease as well as flowering too early and just running their race too early. So there's obviously a requirement, I think, if in a changing climate, to get a wider spread. So that's what Matt's trying to do. So I'm not sure about my time. Okay. So just lastly, just thank everyone that sent me slides, and again, apologies if what you sent to me didn't end up there.
Hi, Wallace Scowling, University of WA. We've heard a couple of mentions of Ascochyta in chickpeas. I'm wondering how much of a problem is it now in Western Australia? We heard from John saying that 10 sprays had to be applied, and if you missed one, the crop was gone. Yeah. This is not good. We know that in the project in WA there were Ascochyta resistant lines. We heard about it this morning. What's happened to them? Mm-hmm. Where are they now?
Yep.
Are they in the breeding program? Where's Ascochyta resistance breeding going in chickpeas?
Yeah, okay, well, I guess we've been doing trials out in our target environment, so we're talking Minyanu, Dalwallinu, Merredin, Narrabeen, those sort of places, and we don't really see Ascochyta as an issue in those lower rainfall areas, which are the target areas for, we're not in such an environment as John and Tony are at. So we certainly see we've demonstrated many times seed dressing, that first spray, 6 to 8 weeks, it's just counterintuitive because you're mostly spraying the earth, but it really does work and it sets it back and you don't get those hot spots developing. And Marty's done this for many years as well. Just some beautiful demonstrations of if you don't bring in dirty seed, you pea pickle it, you put an early spray, 99% of the job's done, Marty, probably, yeah, at that stage. And then you play the season. So if you've got a really great season, you can afford to spray more anyway. But I don't think anyone would grow it. I wouldn't grow it if you had to spray 10 times. I wouldn't grow it if you had to spray 5 times. Resistance, well, Lars is in the room. He knows much more about this than I do. But there's a lot of work. I had a slide from Francis from GRDC, and half of the work is on Ascochyta in that GRDC are funding, both from assessing what we've got out there and whether the strains are changing and what that means, rating our varieties as they are, and then also, as I mentioned, for the chilling tolerance, bringing in from the wild species that genetic resistance and getting that into the normal chickpeas. And if Lars wants to say anything more, I encourage him to. But yeah, I think if I said what does Christy worry about, it's Ascochyta, and then increasing the height is the other thing she's done for us, but Ascochyta is the thing that chickpea breeders have to manage.
Yeah, it's working. I'll quickly add on to that. So GRDC is investing in 5 different programs of research in Ascochyta, and one project led out of Saudi by Tim Sutton's team is focused on developing new lines to bring in with Ascochyta blight resistance, and that includes germplasm from around the globe, so including the wild sizes that Jens and his team, together with colleagues from UC Davis, collected back in Turkey in between 2013 to 2016, as well as material that comes out of the ICARA program. They're using a genomic prediction approach to try and predict which crosses that they make in that program can stack the different sources of resistance and get good breeding values for Ascochyta blight resistance. And at the end of that program of research, it's got another 2 years to go. These breeding lines are going to end up in Christian and Glenn's program, so he might be able to comment a bit more about what current forms of resistance are in the program.
No, I won't comment on that. That's out of my... But what I was going to say is that as well as development in herbicide technology within chickpeas, there's also development in fungicide technology. So you've got a lot more choice in terms of products. So, like it depends on what products you use, depending on how many will determine how many sprays you apply. I know that, our seed crops had nowhere near 10 sprays.
Yeah, probably worth just on the back of that. We only have protectants. We only have what they hit. They don't systemically go, and 6 weeks later magically turn up the fungicides in your crop. So you're only protecting what's there. So I mean, it is a situation of matching spraying time to when you've got the risk. And as I've tried to stress many times, the biggest risk is developing in your own crop. So that early spray, I can't overstress this. It sounds so counterintuitive, but it's like magic.
Two things. One was a question relating to lentils.
Yep.
Do you have a problem over in Western Australia like we are seeing over in the east, which is potentially, aphids coming in, and we're really getting lentils are struggling a lot more over our way because they're getting a virus in them, and you don't really see this until late in the season, and you can't do much about it. And so that's one of the reasons why we were struggling to keep lentils in our area where we want to. And just to comment on my 10 sprays, I just thought we had just under 1,000 millimetres of rain for the year, where our crop of Captain chickpeas was over 1.2 metres high. It was a huge crop. it lodged. It got, not only we got ASCO, and we got that, and I'd been in consultation with Kevin Moore, and so we got that under control. That was easy. But then we also got, this is, kept on growing until January. We got sclerotinia, we got, botrytis grey mould, we got everything, and it just kept on growing. We just had a 9-month season of growing and raining and wet and warm. And so it was just a beautiful environment for disease. So yeah, I was absolutely with you. Yeah. It was absolutely disheartening. If someone had to spray it 10 times, you'd just go away, go into faba beans.
Yeah, I've often said that to farmers, and they've often said, well, I'd spray my chickpeas 10 times if I got 1,000 mils every year, because I'll pick up the difference in my canola and wheat, so I don't care how many times I have to spray it. So that's a nice problem to have, isn't it? Now, your lentils thing, I hope you've been detoxed at the airport, because we don't really see that. So we need to blow down, wash down, scrub before you go out to Merredin.
Okay. So I partly wanted to make the comment about the 10 sprays being a bit of an anomaly, but just to show you what can happen. What I wanted to draw together was an idea that Tony and Andrew and I, which also draws together some of the stuff on the end product, and that's the idea of growing legumes and canola together, intercropping. We went to Canada to see this, and we saw 40,000 hectares of very large farms where half of the farm was an intercrop of a legume and an oilseed together. So these were serious farmers. They were all value adding to the legume into the snack market. They had a vertically integrated business. They could tout the environmental characteristics of their growing because they'd way reduced their inputs. And on the point of disease, one of the things they see is much less disease and much less disease epidemics ripping through their legumes when they had an intercrop with canola. Yeah. The seeds are of different sizes, so they can be sort of sieved at harvest, and that was the biggest challenge to them. They had all the other agronomy under control. What they found the hardest was being able to separate the seed at harvest so the trucks could keep going out and stay with the headers. But anyway, just an interesting thing. The GRDC did support us to go on that trip, and we did write a scoping study, and it seemed to have some legs, but just an idea to sort of think out of the square, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's one for a beer, because I can come up with about 10 different things that's wrong with that.
Well, it is time for a Lupin muffin.
Oh, well, it's nearly a beer.
One final question.
Thank you very much. I'm Rajiv Varshney. I joined Murdoch University a few months back. And at ICRISAT, I was working on the legume crops for last 16, 17 years. And I think for last few months, I'm talking to different colleagues. And I think this platform is fantastic to understand the landscape of legumes. I would like to just comment on about the genetic resistance for the Ascochyta blight. And on the other day, I was talking to Lars also and Christy. So when I was at ICRISAT, and we identified a line, and this was coming from ICARDA, IWLC3217, and we did multi-location phenotyping, had both kind of resistance at seedling as well as adult plant. And through genetics, we also identified some QTLs, and we introgressed some of these QTLs in the elite lines from Punjab region, which is prone for that Ascochyta blight. And through that work, we found really good level of resistance through this introgression. So I'm just wondering, which in context of Australia, because Ascochyta blight is a serious threat, so maybe that some work like that kind of thing can be done here as well. So just wanted to mention. Thank you.
I can only go on Lars nodding his head. Sounds like a good idea, right? Yeah.